It finally happened, and it's worse than anyone imagined. Keir Starmer has snapped. The carefully staged image of calm leadership has crumbled in real time, replaced by pure panic and fury. Just hours before a high-level UK-EU summit meant, to seal a controversial New Deal, everything fell apart. And at the centre of this political explosion, Nigel Farage, calm, calculating and unstoppable. In an urgent, behind-closed-doors meeting with the King, Farage shattered Starmer's grand strategy and exposed the secret deal being brokered in Brussels. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Starmer didn't just lose face, he lost control. Prime Minister pacing like a caged animal, slamming papers, shouting at aides and demanding to know how Farage got so close to the palace. This wasn't just a political setback, this was a total breakdown. The public is waking up to a horrifying truth. Starmer is quietly handing the country back to the EU, and Farage just ripped the curtain wide open. For months, Keir Starmer worked in silence, far from the eyes of Parliament, media, and, most importantly, the people. While public attention was focused on inflation, immigration, and NHS backlogs, Starmer's inner circle was negotiating something far more dangerous: a sweeping new agreement with the European Union. Behind closed doors, confidential documents were exchanged, and quiet visits to Brussels became more frequent. Starmer assured the public this was about cooperation, about security and stability, but the truth is now starting to bleed through the cracks. Sources within Westminster have revealed that the planned deal would rebind the UK to EU legal mechanisms, giving European judges power over British decisions. One clause, never disclosed to the public, would allow the European Court of Justice to override UK court rulings in matters involving cross-border trade and immigration. In simple terms, British judges would no longer have the final say in British law. That's not cooperation, that's surrender. Even more alarming was the so-called youth mobility scheme, a friendly-sounding phrase masking a direct backdoor to open borders. The proposal would allow young Europeans to freely live, work and study in the UK, echoing the very same conditions the British people voted to end in 2016. And yet, Starmer pressed forward. In his view, pragmatism means rewriting history, pretending Brexit never happened, and sneaking Britain back into the EU's grip one clause at a time. He thought he could pull it off quietly until Nigel Farage returned. After months of rising discontent in local elections, Farage sensed something shifting in the political wind. While Starmer was busy flattering EU officials and preparing a carefully staged summit in London, Farage was speaking directly to the people and to someone else with considerable influence: the King. Reports confirm that Farage arranged a private, urgent meeting with the monarch, expressing grave concerns over the erosion of British sovereignty and the blatant bypassing of democratic process. The timing of this meeting wasn't accidental. It was coordinated to land just before the UK-EU summit. Farage didn't come to negotiate. He came to blow the lid off. Within 48 hours of the Farage-King meeting, panic swept through Number 10. Suddenly, media leaks began to emerge. Internal memos from Starmer's staff, never meant to be seen by the public, surfaced online, detailing the full scope of the proposed EU partnership. Clauses about joint military cooperation, terms suggesting shared financial contributions to EU defence initiatives, sections outlining food and agriculture regulations mirroring EU standards that would override British farming policies and disrupt domestic exports. And all of it was being agreed behind closed doors, without debate, without a vote, and without the consent of the people. When news broke that Farage had not only obtained access to these plans, but had discussed them with the King, the atmosphere inside Downing Street turned toxic. Multiple sources describe Starmer in a state of total meltdown, visibly shaken, shouting at staff, and demanding explanations. The illusion of control shattered instantly. This wasn't just a policy failure. This was exposure. For the first time. The public saw the machinery behind Starmer's agenda, a quiet return to EU dominance, wrapped in a ribbon of cooperation and sold as realism. But Farage tore that narrative apart, and the backlash was immediate. Across the country, headlines screamed betrayal. Social media erupted with outrage. On local radio and national TV, callers denounced the government. People felt lied to, again. Not by accident, but by design. Starmer wasn't just leading, he was hiding. And now the truth was out. In a single strategic move, Farage didn't just challenge Starmer, he flipped the entire board. The King, the public, and even some within Labour's own ranks began to question the direction the country was heading. And just like that, the summit meant to celebrate Starmer's historic EU breakthrough was plunged into chaos. But this was only the beginning. In the next wave of fallout, Labour's political foundations would begin to crack, and Reform UK would seize their moment. While chaos engulfed Number 10 and Starmer's team scrambled to contain the EU backlash, something even more powerful was happening on the ground, something the Labour Party had arrogantly dismissed for months. In Stoke-on-Trent, once considered a rock-solid Labour stronghold, a political earthquake was unfolding. Voters, disillusioned, angry and desperate for real leadership, were turning away from the party they once trusted. And at the centre of this rebellion stood a man no one in Labour saw coming. Luke Shenton, the Reform UK candidate who delivered a blow that still has the party reeling. His victory wasn't a fluke. It wasn't just a protest vote. It was a signal, a blaring, undeniable message that millions of ordinary Britons have had enough. Enough of lies. Enough of backroom deals. Enough of being ignored while London elites carve up the future of the country in quiet meetings with Brussels bureaucrats. Shenton's campaign didn't rely on slick advertising or hollow promises. It relied on raw, unapologetic truth. He walked the streets. He spoke to the unemployed steelworker, the mother struggling with rising food prices, the pensioner worried about immigration, and the young man who couldn't get a foot on the housing ladder. He didn't talk down to them. He listened, and then he told them what no one else would. Your suffering isn't accidental. It's political. Stoke was supposed to be safe. Labour had counted on loyalty from a region that had given them unwavering support for decades. But loyalty doesn't survive betrayal. The Farage-led Reform UK movement understood that. They tapped into the deep resentment bubbling under the surface, the broken promises of Brexit, the collapsing public services, and the never-ending flood of decisions imposed by disconnected elites. When Shenton stood up and said that Starmer's EU plans would hand Britain's borders and laws back to foreign powers, people didn't shrug. They nodded. They remembered what they voted for in 2016, and more importantly, they remembered how both Labour and the Conservatives had worked together to sabotage it. In just a few weeks, Shenton flipped the script. Polls tightened. Labour's usual ground. Game faltered. Their campaigners were shouted down on doorsteps. Reform UK rallies grew from dozens to hundreds, and when the final ballots were counted, it wasn't even close. Stoke fell to Reform UK in a thunderclap. Not just a symbolic win, but a devastating humiliation for a party that still believed it was untouchable in Britain's industrial heartlands, and the tremors didn't stop in Stoke. They spread. Suddenly, Labour MPs in the North and Midlands began sounding alarms. Constituency offices were flooded with angry emails and phone calls demanding answers about Starmer's EU negotiations. Union leaders started to waver in their support. Even some centrist Labour allies whispered doubts in private. Reform UK had done what no one thought possible. They made Labour vulnerable in its own backyard. And Nigel Farage wasn't quiet about it. Standing next to Luke Shenton in a jubilant victory speech, Farage declared, "This is just the beginning. If Keir Starmer thinks he can sell this country back to Brussels without a fight, he's got another thing coming." His words weren't bluster. They were a warning. Reform UK was no longer a fringe movement. It was now a serious political threat, capable of mobilising working-class rage and channeling it into action. Starmer watched it all unfold in horror. As the media fixated on Shenton's win and Reform's momentum, the Prime Minister was forced to cancel appearances, scrap planned announcements, and go back to the drawing board. His communications team was in freefall, unsure how to spin the loss in Stoke without sounding tone-deaf. Some tried to blame voter confusion, others blamed disinformation, but none could escape the simple, brutal truth. Labour was no longer the voice of the people. They were the voice of technocrats, lawyers, and foreign diplomats. The people had chosen a different voice, one that roared from the factory floor and echoed through council estates, one that didn't care about political correctness or media approval. Reform UK had cracked the code, and for the first time, Starmer wasn't just facing opposition in Parliament, he was facing a full-blown revolt across the country. But this rebellion wasn't finished. What started in Stoke would spread like wildfire. And in the next chapter of this story, the betrayal hidden within Starmer's EU deal would be revealed in full, sparking a public outcry unlike anything seen since the original Brexit vote. Behind the closed doors of Downing Street, a different kind of war was being waged. While the public was still digesting the shock of Reform UK's victory in Stoke, Keir Starmer and his inner circle were scrambling to hide the details of a deal that had been quietly negotiated for months, a deal so sweeping, so politically explosive, that it threatened to undo everything Brexit had achieved. And now, as pressure mounted and questions began to swirl, pieces of that deal began leaking to the press. What emerged was chilling. This wasn't just a partnership, it was a roadmap, one designed to guide Britain back into Brussels' grip without ever needing another referendum. Starmer's plan was subtle, quiet, and dangerously clever. The cornerstone of the agreement? Judicial alignment. Under the new framework, the European Court of Justice would once again hold sway over British rulings, with new, cooperative, legal standards that gave EU judges the power to override decisions made by UK courts. Starmer called it a mechanism for dispute resolution. But the public saw it for what it truly was, the return of foreign law, and that was only the beginning. The so-called Security Pact, framed by Labour ministers as a strategy to counter Russian aggression, included clauses that bound the UK to EU foreign policy decisions, meaning British troops could be deployed under Brussels' command. The idea that British soldiers might be sent to the front lines by a committee in Belgium sparked immediate outrage from military veterans, defence analysts, and even former Labour MPs. But perhaps the most blatant betrayal came in the form of the Youth Mobility Scheme. On paper, it sounded harmless, a programme to allow young people to study, work and live across borders. But in practice, it opened the floodgates to free movement. Millions of young EU citizens would be granted automatic access to the UK job, market, housing and education system. Once again, the British people were being bypassed. Once again, their vote was being ignored. The 2016 referendum wasn't a suggestion, it was a demand to end open borders, a demand to take back control. And now, less than a decade later, Starmer was wiping it all away. Labour's excuses didn't hold. Ministers called the scheme pragmatic, claiming it would boost the economy. But voters saw the truth. This was Brussels' price for deeper cooperation. And Starmer was willing to pay it, no matter the cost to British workers. His EU deal was packed with soft language, alignment, cooperation, shared standards. But every paragraph pointed to the same conclusion. Britain was being dragged back into the EU's orbit. Slowly. Quietly, irreversibly. Civil service insiders admitted that entire policy departments had been restructured over the past 6 months to prepare for reintegration. New cross-border regulatory bodies were already being formed, with recruitment drives underway. The machinery was moving. The betrayal wasn't on the horizon, it had already begun. But it wasn't until the documents surrounding agricultural regulation were leaked that the real fury erupted. According to the papers, the EU was demanding the UK adopt block-wide food standards, meaning British farmers would lose control over what they could produce, export and sell. From seed to supermarket, shelf, every decision would need to comply with European guidelines. And worse, any British attempt to deviate from these standards could be challenged in European courts. The NFU, National Farmers Union, went ballistic. "This is a direct attack on UK sovereignty," one statement read. "It puts every family, farm in jeopardy." Protests erupted in rural areas, with farmers blocking roads and burning EU flags in open defiance. The backlash was instant and fierce, and it wasn't confined to countryside communities. Truckers, warehouse workers, and small business owners began joining the movement. Even metropolitan areas saw flash protests. London commuters were greeted with posters reading, "Betrayed again, stop the sellout." The betrayal was no longer political, it was personal. Inside the Labour Party, panic set in. Starmer's office launched an aggressive damage control campaign, denying the leaks, discrediting the whistleblowers, and claiming that final terms had not been agreed. But nobody bought it. The public had seen enough. And Nigel Farage? He seized the moment with precision. In a fiery broadcast from the Reform UK headquarters, he read out passages from the leaked documents line by line, showing exactly how British sovereignty was being handed away. "This isn't partnership," he said. "This is surrender with a smile." He called for mass protests, public inquiries, and a national referendum on Starmer's EU deal. His message went viral. Overnight, hashtags like Stop the Sellout Starmer Betrayal and Brexit Backstab began trending. Labour's poll numbers started to fall. Reform UK's surged. What was once unthinkable, a full-scale political revolt against a sitting government, was now on the table. And while Starmer attempted to dismiss the outrage as reactionary nationalism, his words fell flat. Because this wasn't just about nationalism. It was about democracy, about trust, about the fundamental right of a people to govern themselves. That right had been fought for, voted on, and celebrated. Now it was being dismantled, quietly, piece by piece, by a Prime Minister who had promised unity and instead delivered deception. But the British public wasn't going to take it lying down. The backlash had begun, and the storm was just getting started. Keir Starmer's quiet deal has exploded into a national crisis. What began as secret talks with Brussels has ignited a firestorm across Britain, exposing a government that underestimated the will of its people. Nigel Farage's return isn't just political, it's symbolic. A line has been drawn. As Reform UK gains ground and public outrage swells, one thing is clear. This is no longer just about policy. It's about trust, sovereignty, and the future of Britain. The next election won't be business as usual. It will be a reckoning. If you found this video insightful, give it a like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe our channel for more fearless reporting that cuts through the noise. Thank you.